October 27th through 29th marked the 2022 Blender Conference. I was there, and oh boy, let me tell you, those were 3 amazing, exhausting, and above all interesting days. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Blender Conference is a yearly event held within the Blender community where people come together and talk about the one thing they love most, Blender. Now, for the last few years, this event has been postponed due to COVID, such as many other events worldwide, but you can imagine the excitement of over 700 people finally ready and able to talk about Blender. So here's a couple of things I learned and picked up during these amazing 3 days. Blender is ready for the future, or maybe I should just say Blender might just be the future. With the looming presence of the metaverse and AI, 3D has become both more important than ever, but also more under pressure. And this is really something you can feel within the space. So to grow into its role as the industry standard software it wants to be, Blender has announced 3 new initiatives. These are the Blender Lab, Blender Apps, and the Extensions platform. Each of these exciting on its own, Blender Lab will take the world's brightest minds and fund them to develop new technologies for both the world and Blender. Specifically, these will allow for things such as AR, VR tech and tools, networking, sharing, and collaboration on a scale we haven't seen so far. And of course, all of this is done with Blender's core principle in mind, the freedom to create. Now, Blender Apps is a very interesting development, especially for businesses and people who specialize in certain techniques within Blender, because it will allow you to create standalone apps within Blender. These will be available on your PC, but might eventually even come to mobile devices, but that hasn't been confirmed just yet. So if you want to create a quick tool which is very specialized in, for example, showcasing 3D models and applying new textures to them instantly, you can just create this within Blender, export it as an app, and use it on the fly wherever you need it. It's super cool and convenient, and it will allow for such professional measures within pipeline workflows for companies, but also for artists. It will create a lot of freedom to use Blender in different ways. Now, finally, the Extensions platform is Blender's way of seizing control over the add-on market. Now, don't get me wrong, I love add-ons, and so does Blender. They're part of what makes Blender a great product, I feel like, but there's tons of them, and Blender wants a one-stop shop for getting the most convenient ones and the ones they think you need. Now, obviously, this Extensions platform will be free, as we have come to expect from Blender. Now, I saw well over 40 talks during these 3 days. That's a lot, and the one thing that really stood out to me is that everyone uses Blender in their own way. Some use it for specific purposes like storyboarding, others make art with it. There's companies doing entire custom pipeline workflows within Blender, people who created their own versions of Blender even, and I mean all the other things as well: VFX, AR, animation, modeling, of course, procedural environment creation, concepting, and so much more. And this is where Blender plays its strengths. It is a very individual product which anyone can use to do exactly what they want to do. It allows you to be free to do what you want. Now, a question that people always ask in this regard is, can you do X in Blender? Now, and as Paul from CG Cookies stated very well in his talk,
the answer is, well, yes. Yes, you can.
It's just a matter of how. Finding an optimal workflow for this is very important. Now, Daniel Bystad, a senior concept artist who makes very amazing work, spoke about this as well in his talk about creating vehicle concept art with geometry nodes. So like he said,
if I would only do like one spaceship, might be better to do it manually, you know?
If you need 100 spaceships, it might be better to create a procedural system which will automatically generate different versions for you. So what is my point here? Well, it's that you as an artist have to make choices on what you want out of Blender. Blender basically does it all, but you have to point it in the right direction. Setting up a workflow within Blender to fit your needs, whether simple or complex, can save a bunch of time on all of your projects. There's no right or wrong here, it's just a matter of making Blender work for you as best as possible. So amongst the 96 talks given, obviously there's a few which really grab my attention. So I've made a short list of some of my favorites, and I've put links in the descriptions down below so you can watch all of these in its entirety, and I really advise you to do so because it's very valuable information if you want to grow as an artist or creator. So starting on day 1, Brent Patterson and Sam Davis showed a very cool music video completely done within Eevee and made up of 3D scans, which they've taken over 25,000 photos for. So that's a ton of photos, and it was a very inspirational thing to see, and it had this almost Ian Hubert-esque style in which they kind of accepted the fact that the 3D scans weren't perfect, and instead of just, you know, discarding them, they used them stylistically to create a very unique look of these sort of broken 3D scans. It's a very cool style to have within your video. Following this up was another amazing talk by, in my opinion, one of the best grease pencil artists out there, Addons. Now, you might know him, and if you don't, you should go check him out for sure. He does crazy cool animations and artworks all done with grease pencil in Blender. Specifically, he speaks about how he found his style within Blender and how Blender helped him sort of realize the vision that he's had for years in his mind and take it, you know, to something actual and real and visible, which he could show to his fans. Now, he's grown massively, and I think he deserves all the attention for it, so definitely go check out his talk. On the second day, Dylan Gu did several amazing talks talking about how he creates NPR style stuff within Blender. Now, I specifically like the talk where he showed how to use the camera angle to tell a different narrative. So let's say you have an animation and you've set it all up, you've created the textures, the character animation, everything is all done, lighting, etc., and you kind of want a different mood for the scene, and you don't want to change anything. Well, that's actually possible. So he showed that without changing anything in the scene except for your camera angles, you can completely change the narrative of the scene and give it a completely different vibe. So a very cool technique to have under your belt, and I think something every animator should know. Now, furthermore, on day 2, Andrew Price, or Blender Guru as you all know him, gave a very interesting talk about creating realism within Blender, or how to improve your realism basically. So to do this, he used great examples from Toy Story 4 in which he highlighted basically lighting, light fall off, reflections, and in-camera optics. And it's basically a great crash course in improving as a 3D artist. Now, for the final talk on day 2, I want to again highlight the Daniel Bystad talk, which he did on creating vehicle concept art in Blender. So using geometry nodes, he created a procedural system, and yes, I know I'm a sucker for geometry nodes, which allowed him to generate hundreds of procedural spaceships. So he showed us how to set up a procedural system which would allow us to create basic shapes, add detailed shapes, UV unwrap the model, and apply a texture to it. Actually, not that difficult if you see it, but still very impressive if you look at the end result. And that brings us to day number 3, which for me started off again with another Geometry Nodes talk. And yes, as you might have noticed, Geometry Nodes was a very hot topic during the Blender conference. So in this one, Emilis showed us how to create breathtaking environments in Blender using Geometry Nodes. So specifically a procedural fantasy city, and all of it done with Geometry Nodes to create variations and help him improve on his concept art to quickly generate new examples and new angles of a city. Now, I really liked it because it was a first for me in how Blender could be combined with procedural stuff to create concept art. After that, I went to a talk by Lino Thomas, and he gave his view on creating agreeable sci-fi art. And it's actually simpler than it might look. So he called his talk How to Copy and Paste Properly in Blender, which effectively it was. He used this very cool technique with a mirror modifier and lots of arrays and small details, and then just stacking these together to create these very intricate shapes, and then paste them on this big block objects to create all of this agreeable art. So in under 1 hour, actually, he showed us how to go from the default cube to a very detailed agreeable artwork. Very impressive to see, and definitely something you should check out if you want to get into these agreeable style artworks. Now, finally, I'd like to highlight Conrad Justin's talk about the artistic perception of reality. Effectively, he helps you to improve your inner forms as an artist with several techniques he shows you about how to use real life and nature as guides for realism and your artistic perception. And whether you're a 2D or 3D artist doesn't really matter in this case. These techniques will apply to any of it, and it will definitely help you become a better artist. Now, after seeing all of these very inspirational talks about Blender, and this video of course, you're probably aching to get started creating something of your own in Blender. So how about you check out this video right here to help you get started. And as always, a big thank you to the following patrons for supporting the channel.